South Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Thank you. Madam President, less than 2 weeks ago, Iran attacked Israel with a barrage of more than 300 missiles and drones. The attack was a notable escalation on Iran's part, since the weapons were fired not just by Iranian proxies, but also directly from Iran. And it was a reminder of two things. First and foremost, the attack was a reminder of the need for the United States and the free world to make it clear to Iran that we are not going to stand idly by while Iran attacks Israel and continues to foment terror in the Middle East. Iran's malign activities have been allowed to go on for far too long. And it's past time, not just for the United States, but for the nations in Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere, to call a halt to Iran's activities. On a larger scale, Madam President, Iran's attack on Israel was a reminder that bad actors and hostile powers are going to fill any space that they think they can fill. And if the United States and other free countries abdicate leadership or telegraph weakness on the global stage, bad actors are going to be happy to step in to fill the vacuum. I would not be surprised if the Biden administration's all too frequent posture of appeasement toward Iran and the lack of clarity the administration has telegraphed about U.S. support for Israel has emboldened Iran to reach further and engage in the kind of escalation that we saw this month. Madam President, bad actors around the world are flexing their power right now. Iran in the Middle East, Russia in Europe, China in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And these powers are forging alliances with each other to advance their activities. Iran has provided Russia with weapons to use in its war on Ukraine and is working with Russia to produce drones at a Russian facility. Meanwhile, Russia has committed to supplying Iran with fighter jets and air defense technology, assets which, as a recent Washington Post article noted, and I quote, could help Tehran harden its defenses against any future airstrike by Israel or the United States, end quote. And when it comes to China, the Secretary of State recently reported, and I quote, we see China sharing machine tools, semiconductors, other dual-use items that have helped Russia rebuild the defense industrial base that sanctions and export controls had done so much to degrade, end quote. Madam President, in the face of increased aggression from these powers, the United States' response needs to be one of strength. And that includes not just having a strong military and a strong economy, but engaging on the global stage. As I said, bad actors will fill any space they think they can fill. And when the United States and other free countries abdicate leadership on the global stage, bad actors will step in to fill the vacuum. The foreign aid contained in this bill is an important part of telegraphing America's refusal to cede the global stage to hostile powers. It will help demonstrate to Iran our support for Israel and help our ally rid itself of the threat of Hamas on its border. It will help make it clear to Russia that the United States is not going to give Russia free rein in Eastern Europe. It will help make a credible investment in our own industrial base and replenish interceptors that we've used in the Red Sea. And it will let China know that while Taiwan may be small, its backing is not. And Madam President, sending these messages is important. It is in our nation's interest to ensure that a newly victorious and emboldened Putin isn't sitting on the doorstep of 4 NATO states whom we are bound by treaty to protect. It is in our nation's interest to ensure that a China inspired by a Russian victory in Ukraine doesn't decide that it's time to invade Taiwan. And it's in our nation's interest to ensure that Israel is equipped to defend itself from Iran and its terrorist proxies. Madam President, I'm pleased that in addition to the funding for Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine we've considered before, the bill before us today includes some new measures. Notable among them is legislation to ban TikTok if the company is not purchased by an entity unaffiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. Currently, the Chinese Communist Party is able to gain unlimited access to the account information of TikTok users, if it so chooses. And the news that emerged last week that the Chinese embassy has actually lobbied congressional staff against legislation to force the sale of TikTok was a stunning confirmation of the value the Chinese government places on its ability to access Americans' information and shape their TikTok experience. And so I'm very pleased that the bill before us today would ban TikTok if it is not sold to a company without ties to the Chinese Communist Party. I'm also pleased that this legislation includes the Rebuilding Economic Prosperity and Opportunity for Ukrainians Act, or the REPO Act, which would direct frozen Russian assets to rebuilding efforts in Ukraine. Russia has caused a horrifying amount of destruction in Ukraine, and it is right that Russian assets should go toward its rebuilding. This bill also contains additional accountability measures for our support for Ukraine, including a provision that would turn some of the funding into loans to be repaid by Ukraine when it is back on its feet. Madam President, does this bill cover everything we should be doing on the national security front, either at home or abroad? No, it doesn't. But it will provide essential support to our allies. It will not only help them preserve their freedom, but will advance U.S. interests around the globe. And so I look forward to the Senate's passing this legislation this week and sending a clear message about American resolve and about American strength. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.